So today I have the real honor and pleasure of inviting you, Dr. Vera Tarman, to my pod. And I'm so thrilled to have you here today. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for the invite to speak.
Yeah, and whereabouts are you based, Vera, in the world?
I'm speaking out of Toronto, Canada. Yeah.
Gorgeous. Now, Dr. Vera, can you please tell me, who are you?
All right. So I'm somebody who I'm an addictions physician, and I work in a couple of treatment centers. So that's my sort of day job. I've been working in that field for the last 20 years in addiction medicine. But my sort of evening job or my passion is talking about food addiction, because although it's not an official diagnosis in the medical world, it is something that's clinically very obvious in the addiction world. And then once you see it in the addiction world, you see it in the larger world. And so I've taken it upon myself to speak about it at whatever opportunity that I can, like, for example, with you. And with your clientele or audience, I think it's really important because it's children that we need to get at first, because they're going to be our future.
And how young can a child be to have a food addiction?
Well, it's a hard question. I don't know, because it's hard to know, but I can say that we are primed to like sweet. That's sort of built within us, because sweet is energy dense, and especially sweet in the context of fat. I mean, that's mother's milk. So a baby is already primed to like sweet. And of course, we can be primed earlier than birth, because mother can promote an even stronger sweet preference just by virtue of the diet that she eats. So we're already sort of primed to be food addicts, but we wouldn't become food addicts. We're primed to like sweet foods, but we wouldn't overindulge in sweet foods if the opportunity didn't exist. I mean, mother's milk ends at a certain point, and then regular foods like fruits and vegetables, the amount of sweet that's in there, which is plentiful to enjoy food, is not enough to create food addiction. So historically, there's no evidence that tells me when a child goes from overeating of foods that they would do normally, because that's built into us, to excessive overeating. That's really a phenomena in the last 100 years. And I could say that I see that clinically right from the time the child gets to choose their food. Because I think it's a fallacy. I imagine we'll talk about this sometime in our talk today, but I think it's a fallacy to say, for a mother to say, let the child choose. The child doesn't, it goes with what is there, and then it will adapt. And then our physiology is such that if that potence, if what they choose or what's there for them that they then reach for is over sweet, like junk food, then we're wired to choose that ongoing. So that could start right from the time that the child gets to eat real food or foods besides mother's milk.
6 months? From 6 months?
Sure, yes, it could, because if mother starts to, and believe me, I've seen this, if mother starts to feed the child juice in a bottle instead of milk, or pop, soda pop in a bottle instead of water or something else, milk, then they're already getting too much sweet. And so now we're setting the stage for food addiction. They're not a food addict yet, but if that's all they do, and that apparently is the case for a number of families, where that's all they do is give the child juice or pop, sugary pop, and so then they're food addicts in the making.
Yeah. And how about taste buds?
Well, yes. Well, I think taste buds acclimatize to whatever the child is eating. So if the child were not introduced to a highly potent sweet product, they would actually learn to really like carrots and really like vegetables, because they are inherently sweet. Like a carrot is quite sweet. If you're not eating sweet foods, you'll actually notice the sweetness of it. Or beets, or foods that actually have a lot of sugar, natural sugar in them. And I don't have a problem with fruits and vegetables. It's when we take the sweet out of that and basically make it a drug. And a child is prone to that, and so is an adult. And the sweet buds will, our taste, sweet receptors will acclimatize so that you'll want more sweet, and it won't taste that sweet. And if you stop eating the sweet and declimatize back to sort of normal, you're going to be like, oh my God, that is so sweet. Like they're receptive. We have to, I don't know if the word would be train them, but we have to wait for them to readjust one way or the other.
And how does the food addiction develop?
So this is the thing, and I really hope we talk about this concept, because I've already brought it up once, and it's bugging me because it's Halloween coming up soon, and candy and cake. Like tomorrow is Halloween. I don't know if that's such a big deal with you, but in here in Canada and the US, oh my God, everywhere you go, there's candy, candy, candy. So it just makes me very annoyed. I'm in an annoyed part of my life when I see so much, and Christmas, of course, will be the next time. But so like we say, let the child choose. The child can't choose. It can only go with what's there. And of course, we will always go with what's more energy dense. So we have to kind of adapt and teach the child. But anyway, addiction itself develops when you have too much of something that we like, no matter what it is. It could be love, it could be sex, it could be reading books, it could be talking to people. Anything that's that we like is usually life-sustaining in its original form. Like food in its original form, like fruit and vegetables, are meant to be tasty so that we eat them in the summertime or when they're abundantly grown, and to nourish us at that time. So we're built for that. But if you take the inherent pleasure of normal foods or normal anything, and then potentiate that, make that bigger, then my body is naturally prepared to handle. I'm going to start to adapt to that excess. And that adaptation, which is normal, that normal adaptation to excess is actually the beginning of the phenomena of addiction. At that point, we just call it tolerance. I become tolerant. That thing that's too much, my body will go, oh, that's too much. And it's going to try to make it normal. And that normalizing is called tolerance. And then, of course, if you like that extra feeling, you're going to want more of it. And so you chase more, and then you start to develop that phenomena of, I need more to get that same pleasurable extra effect. And once you start chasing that, the body follows back and says, no, 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 I want that to be normal. And you want more. So there's this constant readaptation. And that process is the beginning of addiction. So how does addiction develop? It develops when you have an excess, and also if it's very fast, like a lot of candies all at once, a lot of sugar, and drinking it is even faster. Alcohol is even faster. That's why we become addicted. It's too much very quickly. I can become addicted to anything if it's too much very quickly. And food is an excellent way to do that. Basically junk food, candy, all that stuff. It's basically fruit and vegetables, but in high amounts. Get rid of the fiber, get rid of the skin, get rid of the water, just have the potency of that sweet that you're actually after. Too much, and then there we have it. Voila, addiction. Over time, not right away, but over time. Yeah. And then, how do you know if you're addicted, or if your child is addicted? It would just be by the behavior. Like if you give a child or yourself, you eat something and you're full, it's like, I really enjoyed my meal, but I'm full. Let's finish the meal and let's get up and read a book or do something else. But when you're stuck at the table and you want more, even though you're full, because you're still chasing that extra feeling, wasn't enough in the food, you want more. And so how do you know? It's when you can't stop. So the kid says, I want more, but they don't want other stuff. They're going to choose the sugar over, real food. If you can't stop, you want to stop, but you can't. You never feel satisfied. You're still hungry. I mean, it's a false hunger. These are all signs that something is going on that's becoming, I actually think addiction is a normal adaptation to an abnormal environment. And I guess I don't. Basically, that's what's happening. Yeah.
And if we look at percentage, how many children do you think suffer food addiction today?
Well, that's an interesting question because there was research actually just done on that very question. Ashley Gearhart, who designed the Yale Food Addiction Inventory. I mean, she made her career off of this wonderful tool of how can you actually diagnose food addiction. It's not the best scale ever, but it's the best one we've got. I mean, it's not the best because it's hard to determine it between comfort eating and eating disorders and all sorts of other problems with eating, but it's the best one that we've got. And she's now sorted out, or she's estimated using this scale over multiple countries, groups like weight groups, age groups. What's the general prevalence? And then specifically, you're asking about children. I think the general prevalence now, she would say, is about 14 to 15% in society. And with children, she would, I guess it depends obviously on where. I don't remember because I wasn't expecting this specific question. I should have actually. I don't remember where, if we're looking at just the US or if we're looking at sort of US and Canada and Europe. Yeah, but it's somewhere between 18%. So it's not 100%, which I'm actually surprised because the countries that she's studying, there's a prevalence of ultra processed food and sugar. So I would think it would be higher than 18%. But you know, we tend to be with research, you tend to be as careful as you can be about estimations. So I would say it's about 18%. That's depending on a number of variables, but that's, you know, 1/4 of children.
Mm-hmm. And how will this affect the cost of society?
You mean like what will it do to society? I mean, this is the crux of the question, is what are we doing to our children and to our society? One of the things I really want to emphasize is, first of all, sugary foods, processed foods are not foods. And people will say, you can't be addicted to food. That's ridiculous. But these are not foods. They're only called foods because the food industry is obviously making a profit off of us thinking that not only are they food, but they're actually pleasurable and representative of love and acceptance and warm family good feelings. That's all thanks to the food industry. These are drugs. So I'm not talking about food like fruits and vegetables. I'm talking about these food products. And when we introduce these to society, because they are a drug, let's call it what it is, then I'm going to say that, make a blanket statement that they are a gateway drug to other drugs. And you know, when you have a high potency of something, that means your brain has adjusted to that extra amount of whatever it is. Now it's going to be more open to other addictions like smoking cigarettes, like pill addiction, like we've got an opiate crisis out there, alcoholism, like it's a gateway to many other drugs, including ongoing lifelong food addiction. So what are we doing? We're introducing a life of addictive behavior. And then of course, all the metabolic consequences of eating all that sugar, like diabetes. We see diabetes in children. I'm sure you've talked about this in your other podcasts. Diabetes in children, like children, they shouldn't be. It used to be called mature onset diabetes. And I think that we could say that the prevalence of diabetes, which has gone up in children, is almost, I don't have research for this, it needs to be done still, but it's parallel to the addiction crisis in children. Like they're going up the same because it's the same phenomena that's happening. One is in the body, the insulin receptors, one is in the brain, the dopamine receptors. It's a similar devastation of this overly potent food that we call food, but it's actually a drug. So what are we doing to kids? We're creating disease like addiction, like diabetes. And then, of course, the other thing that happens is other manifestations. Yes, metabolic syndrome, but what about things like ADHD and anxiety, depression? And I'm not saying that
insomnia.
Sugar causes. Yeah, I'm not saying it's almost like when a child. And the children are more susceptible than adults. Like their brains are developing. You know, what are we doing to the most vulnerable creatures of humanity? Are our children that we're inflicting these drugs? It's like throwing cigars at them or cigarettes and saying, "Hey, let's see what happens to you." It's insane. I think. Anyway, so they're responding. I mean, a drug affects our neurochemistry. So, and where do we manifest our neurochemistry but in our moods, mental health, our good mental health or bad mental health? And so when we throw in a drug, I'm not saying that sugar causes ADHD, although there's been arguments about that, but it certainly makes a person more ADHD or gives them symptoms that look like ADHD or depression or anxiety. And if you remove the sugar, you might find out that your child actually has ADHD that's quite manageable or doesn't have it at all because it was just the manifestation of the sugar. Not to say that those are not distinct conditions, but sugar definitely makes that stuff worse. And not only sugar, but processed food in general. So what are we doing to our kids? We're giving them, I'm giving a very bad prognosis here, but that's what you do when you give a child a drug. Poor mental health, poor physical health, and further addictive behavior. Please, parents, this is my, you're asking me to speak. I'm happy to speak because if there is one parent that goes, maybe I should rethink how I'm going to do Halloween, or rethink this thing about, well, we'll just let the child decide. No, you wouldn't let a child decide to smoke a cigarette or drink a bottle of vodka because their dad is. Like, you wouldn't. Let's not do that with sugar either.
Mm. And from a political standpoint,
Yes.
what's happening there? Do you see any political work being done on the food industry with legislations?
Yeah, well, that's, this is our ongoing battle. So I'm medical, I'm not political. So on the medical front, our political battle is to get food addiction, ultra processed food addiction, even just sugar addiction, written up in the DSM-4 or the ICD, some version of a mental health or psychiatric diagnosis platform. If we can get that in there, then we get the validity that we need from a medical point of view. Now, there are people who are speaking on a more political level of, should we tax our sugars? I've even heard to the extent of taxing sugars to all the way to, should we do something to parents who inflict these foods on our kids? Like, I mean, I'm not suggesting that we do that, but there's all sorts of ideas about this. What's actually going to fly is very hard. It's a battle because we're battling big sugar, we're battling big pharmacies, because I'm sorry to say it, but they're happy about this bane of diabetes. Look at the money they're making on Ozempic and other drugs. They're doing very well, thank you very much. Even big exercise, all of the fitness stuff. These are unfortunately doing very well on our illness. And so we have to battle them if we want to change that, because we're basically coming from a grassroots democratic, from the people up, because from the system down, there's no benefit. Even the medical profession, there's no benefit. I make my money. My bread and butter money is on diabetes and obesity and all of the consequences. So does my profession, not me, but my profession truly benefit if we get rid of those things? And I don't know what would happen. I think it would be a great idea, but anyway, the people where it matters, they're not interested. And that's the politics. So basically, I think that it's nice to talk about policies. I think the best we're going to get is taxing, which we do see in various countries. But likely most of the action will happen from the bottom up, from the people saying enough, just like we did with cigarettes, enough with this. Because even medicine was very slow in saying, yeah, this is a real problem. It took them years to say, yep, it for sure causes cancer. But people were saying it for a long time before that. And similarly with this, it's us having to put the pressure up as opposed to hoping that there'll be something coming down to control things. Which is why your voice and the people that use this is why this work is so important. Wherever we can have it happen amongst the people, that's where the politics, I think, will really happen. People, I guess it's bottom line. People will vote with their money. They're just going to say, I'm not going to buy this stuff anymore. Sorry.
When you look at health and politics, it's always a short-term gain benefit when it comes to health. Why is that?
Well, because because it benefits the provider, basically. I guess a simple example of that would be somebody comes in and says, I'm diabetic. The short-term solution would be, here's a diabetic medication, off you go. And by the way, you should try to lose a bit of weight. But, to actually say, you may not need this diabetic medication. Let's take an hour or a half an hour. I don't have an hour and a half an hour in a medical day. But anyway, the ideal solution would be, let's take some time and actually sit down and look at what dietary changes you can make, which are actually pleasant. You're not going to be hungry. You're not going to be not satisfied. You're going to actually do very well. And you may not need that medication after all. That would be the best solution. But it's not, it's long-term pain for the provider. So the short-term solution is, here's the medication. The person leaves thinking, well, that was quick. I'm done. And I get to still eat my cake. All I have to do is increase my insulin and I'm good. There we are. It's a short-term solution. Of course, we know that the more a person eats sugar, even when they increase their insulin or increase their medications, they're becoming further and further insulin resistant, and therefore long-term pain. But as the clinician, that's not my problem anymore, because you're out of my office. Next patient, please. And that person is going to suffer 5-10 years down the road,
It's clearly not working. So we need
No.
to sort of rebuild the whole system, right?
Yes, we need to. It's not likely to happen while it's benefiting the providers. And that's the medical profession, that's the pharmaceutical profession, the food industry. So I'm saying they're big Goliaths. They're huge conglomerations. And the only way, I think, is that we have to do it on our own. That the people have to say no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And take your power back and start making better choices, waking up to, the programming that it's actually an agenda behind what's on the shelves in the supermarket. Exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
It's all capsule driven, right?
Yes.
So what is prevention? Let's say a parent is starting with solids. How can they give them the best start in life?
Well, I think, okay, third time, I'm sorry, I don't want to be a broken record, but I think that is for the parent to recognize that their parents, they're teaching their children, their developing brain and their developing body. So they get to choose what's healthy for the baby, not let the baby and the child choose. And so what they should do is basically eat real foods, introduce them to real fruits, real vegetables. Kids will always choose the highly energized products, which are sugars. But if they didn't have that option, if they didn't even know such an option existed, they would learn to love, like I said, carrots and Brussels sprouts and all those things. Maybe not so quickly Brussels sprouts to carrots, but you can introduce real foods, and with the understanding that some foods take a little bit more trials, but the child will eventually adapt, because we are an adaptive species, as long as they're not introduced to the highly potent stuff. So what can a parent do? Don't introduce sugar in the first place. And if they're going out somewhere, get the kid to bring their own fruits and vegetables cut up nicely, something. They're going to like it because that's all they know. And I don't know, somehow teach them, you don't want to eat that other stuff or drink that stuff. Yes, I know people are doing that, but I don't know. This is where coaches and people like you will help parents in introducing, here's how you can do it in a way that is enticing for the child, as opposed to them feeling like they're being deprived. There are ways to do that, but I would focus on that for sure. So it's not about being hungry and cutting them off of delicious foods. It's not introducing them to a drug. It's very hard to get somebody to stop something that is potent. It's like quitting smoking. It's hard, but if you're never a smoker, you don't want a cigarette. Once you're a smoker, now you want a cigarette. So don't introduce the drug in the first place. Protect them, because we are parents. We're supposed to protect our children. And then if something has happened, like they've been introduced, teach them tools how to manage. I think that we can teach children how to eat in moderation, but not drug foods, real foods. And they will, because our body wants to eat moderately. If you're not eating moderately, it's because there's something addictive in your. Nobody wants to eat until they're sick and feel horrible and throw up, have diarrhea. Nobody wants to do that. But we do that when we're eating foods that are driving us beyond the need to stop, the call to stop. Because we have some part of us that's saying you got to stop. Most people who are overeating know I should stop now. I should have stopped a half an hour ago, but they can't because of the addiction. So let's help our kids not get into that cycle.
So in terms of brains and the brain development, what's the difference? Has there been any science research on where, you know, you are stuffing yourself with processed foods, whereas if you eat healthy, traditional, normal, sugar-free foods, what happens with the brains?
Well,
what's the difference?
If you're eating normal foods, it's just like if you're doing anything normal that's pleasurable. It's pleasurable to eat that stuff, like nice foods. It's a dopamine response, and that's there for a reason, because my body wants me to eat fruits and vegetables or whatever it is that you're eating, cheese, meat, whatever. It wants you to eat that. And that pleasurable feeling is the dopamine response, or the desire to eat it is the dopamine response. But it's fine because it's normal and it's not overtaxed. But when you introduce a drug food, which makes too much dopamine, sugar, it spikes up. Like we see, you know, with PET scans and SPECT scans, we see that the uptake of dopamine is much higher, like equivalent to, people have said this, equivalent to cocaine. It's much higher than carrots and good foods. And so when it's that much higher, this is, like I said, the development of addiction. We want to avoid that spike, and that spike happens only with processed foods. Well, I don't want to say only. If somebody's developed a food addiction where they're overeating all the time, even healthy foods, you can get a spike then too. But a child is not likely to be doing that unless there's something else going on, some kind of leptin deficiency or something. But most of the time, you're not going to see a child eating too many carrots, too much lettuce. They're going to eat until they're full, and that's it. Thanks, I want to go out and play now. It's when the child wants to stay, something else is going on. That's dopamine.
And is that, you know, obviously with the obesity epidemic we're having a lot of overweight people and obese people. Is that due to food addiction, you think?
Well, I think that it's that remember I was talking about the Ashley Gearhart research. She has looked at specifically obese compared to non-obese, and also age groups. So like she found out about children, 18%. But she's looked at obesity versus non-obese, and she's found that it's a much higher percentage of food addiction. Kind of, it makes sense, doesn't it? For people who are obese, and it's more in the not 15% general population, but it's closer to 50 to 60%, much higher. It does mean that there are a lot of obese individuals or people with you know, a large body mass index who are not food addiction, that it could be just a hormonal problem, like an insulin deregulation, because I think you could make the argument that excess weight is a result of insulin resistance, like they're all connected. And I think that a high number of them, it's also essentially a dopamine resistance, or a dopamine similar to insulin, but in the brain. So yeah, it's a pretty high amount.
And I think I read that the obesity epidemic is costing just the UK alone about 6.5 billion pounds per year in taxpayers' money.
Yeah, it's going to cost even more now that we've got these new drugs, which are so expensive. Because, you know, you think about where are the costs coming from? Well, we're treating all the obesity, we're treating all the diabetes, because obesity and diabetes tend to clump together. Obesity is a very expensive disease to have. Diabetes, because you got to deal with all the complications, the metabolic complications. heart disease and high cholesterol and high blood pressure. That's big medicine, big industry. And then, of course, all the medications to treat all of those things. And now that we have these new medications that are solely for diabetes and weight loss, they are like, $2,000 a month, American dollars, 1,000 to 2,000, sometimes possibly even more as new meds come out. And if everybody gets access to those and more people are becoming obese, that's going to really blow our system. Like, I mean, Canada, we have a healthcare system that is free, and a lot of medications are free. We're not going to be able to afford it. It's laughable. It's laughable. And by the way, a very good solution, which is totally free, is don't eat this stuff. We would save our healthcare system if we didn't eat this stuff.
So if we continue, we will basically collapse the healthcare system.
I think so.
Sinking ship, right?
Yes, it's a sinking ship, and we're not going to make people healthier. Like, we're not going to make them healthy. It does not make them healthy. It is really a short-term solution. You give somebody diabetic medication or addiction medication, it lasts, I don't know, maybe 6 months, a year, and then you've got to up the dose. Like, it's a continual thing until finally you say, that's all I got, whereas if you just went to the initial problem and resolved the problem, stop eating the foods that are doing this to us, it's totally free. And a lot of diabetes can regress, a lot of addiction can regress. You're not necessarily not addicted, but you can become in remission. Diabetes in remission, cancer in remission, Alzheimer's in remission, and addiction in remission. Like, it's possible to slow down things, maybe even stop them.
And how about schools and children in school during school hours? Should the politicians take responsibility for the school children to teach and educate them about proper nutrition?
Yes,
and make free available school meals?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. I mean, that avenue is already there, but unfortunately, the big food has stepped in there and said, well, you're going to offer free meals, but offer foods that are junk food, like, they call ketchup, tomato. They call, I don't know, they call various things tomatoes when they're not. They're actually processed foods. So the structure is there for the schools to step in and help with dietary advice. But it's just the advice that they're given has to be funded by something, and it's the food industry, so it hasn't helped. Another example would be hospitals should have foods that are healthy, but they don't, because the foods that they offer come from food companies that come in, and they're there for a profit. So they're going to give the cheapest, most high carb foods that are available. You would think that a hospital or a school would have healthy foods, but no, it doesn't. It has what is the best, the highest bidder in that area of food that's available. So it should.
It's a human right not to be hungry and to be fed properly, isn't it?
Yes,
a human right.
It is. It is a human right. Absolutely. Unfortunately, human rights, I think it was Marion Nestle who said, the food industry is not a social service industry. It's a profit industry. It's a human right, but we have given up a lot of our human needs to profit companies. And I've actually heard people in the industry say, I don't eat this stuff myself at home, but I sell it because it's my job. So I think a call to action to parents to start from day one, getting kids involved in making their own lunches, making it fun, and making healthy foods fun. Like, this is the job I think that parents could take on. They've been giving it over because they're busy. Schools are supposed to be doing this and they're not. So just basically taking more ownership over what their child is eating. Yeah.
Right. So, Dr. Vera, what has been your biggest fear in your life so far?
About what's happening in society around food. I mean, today in 2023, there are so many fears. Look at climate changes. Everywhere you look, there's another fear. Politics out there. But in terms of food, I think my biggest fear is that is our children. I mean, I am intelligent enough to know that I have the ability to make a choice, or at least know if I'm addicted to something, what I need to do. And I can look on YouTube, I can do all sorts of things to teach myself. My child cannot. They are reliant on me to do that. And I think that the people who are teaching children right now, like commercials, schools, whoever is out there, not the parents, but whoever is out there, has motives that are not in the child's interest. And so don't trust them. And because of that, I worry that children are given too much control and too much external guidance from people, like I said, that have no interest in their best health. And they're going to become obese, sick, and addicted. But this is what I worry about. And then what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. That's what I worry about. Yeah.
And I read something about if you have an obesity by the time you're 12 years old, you will most likely remain obese for your entire life.
I think that's highlights it exactly. And although I don't have a statistic that says the same thing, I bet you could say the same thing about addiction, because we know that the younger child picks up a cigarette or picks up marijuana or picks up alcohol, the more likely they're going to become addicted as they're older. You know, of course, everybody wants to experiment, but if you can make the window of experimentation later, like into 19, 20, 21, that's much better than 13, 12, 8. That's really dangerous, you know. Try to keep the experimentation phase older, when the child has more frontal lobe capacity to make up their own minds. Yeah.
And how about omega-3? I mean, I remember my dad, when he was going to school, he was given cod liver oil capsules in school.
Yeah.
To help with concentration.
Isn't it interesting how those tools got kicked out, but other ones stayed? Yeah, that's a very good idea, omega-3, because it's supposed to help for neuronal development. I mean, that's where our brain is primarily focused on fat, or it requires fat for good growth. So yes, I think that's a great idea. I mean, if we could get a school program that had not just cod liver oil, but their foods were actually salmon and all this kind of stuff, that would be great. That would be great. Instead of French fries and battered fish. Not great.
Have you seen in the research that there is a lack of omega-3 in children today? Have you
specifically
any studies?
I think that just if we look, I don't have research in front of me that I can quote to you, but I can certainly affirm that if you're looking at junk food, processed food, which is what kids are given primarily, it's what they choose if they could choose on their own. There's no omega-3 in you know, processed carbohydrates, chips and candies and French fries and stuff like that. So just by virtue of not eating foods like fish or cod liver or something like that, and eating that other stuff, they're not getting the essential nutrients they need. These foods ultra processed foods are nutrition deficient. They don't have the things that the child needs. Yeah.
And what happens when you have a deficiency of omega-3 in your brains?
Well, that's better to ask a nutritionist than me. I can't give you the mechanism of that, but I can just say that the brain of a child is growing, developing actually until adolescence and later. And if you're not giving it's a building block. Omega-3 is a building block for neuronal development. And if you're not nourishing that development. Yeah, but I'm sure that you can find research, but I don't have it to say, you know, you may not develop a certain amount, like a percentage amount, and there may be an IQ deficiency. I'm sure you could say that, but I don't have those figures.
Where do you hope we are in 10 years from now?
Hope, or what I anticipate? I'm hoping that there will be you know, I'm a pretty realistic person. So I'm not going to say that the food industry will have cottoned on and they'll change. I don't expect that to happen. But what I do hope is that there'll be a strong secondary community of people who are acknowledging that ultra-processed food and sugar, refined carbohydrates are unhealthy, so that when a person says, I don't want to eat this, I don't want my children to eat this, they won't be left with, you know, what's wrong with you? Are you one of those weird people? They'll actually go, oh, okay, you're one of them that does that. Okay, no problem. We'll respect that. Kind of like we still tolerate people who smoke and people who I guess drink alcohol, but you can easily say, look, I'm a non-smoker, I'm a non-drinker, and people go, okay, good, fine, I'm a non-sugar eater. I would like to see that as an option so that it's not so hard. This is very hard to live sugar-free. And if you have a child, it's even harder because they are so inundated with temptations all over. Like you can't live in society without being bombarded with it. So I would like to see that there's an alternative path, at least, that you could choose to eat well. Is that possible in 10 years? Yes, I think it is, because of podcasts like this and more people who are talking about it and are going, yeah, you know what, I think I'm going to do this. The more people who do that, then the more acceptable it becomes to step out of the norm of what it is today. That's what I hope for.
Anything else you'd like to say as a final word to the people out there?
Yes, I'd like to say, for if anybody's listening thinking, oh my God, she's telling me I can't eat sugar again and my children can't eat sugar, like I'm going to deprive them of something. You're deprived. It's just, imagine it like a cigarette. You're depriving them of a life of illness and of depression and feeling not thriving. That's what you're depriving them of. If you can see it as, we have like you said, a birthright to eat well. We have a birthright to feel well and vigorous and strong, and sugar and processed food gets in the way of that. So if you can see it as I get to live the fullest life without having these obstacles to ill health penetrate me. So I would say, if you can see it that way, it's a more positive thing. You're not going to do it unless it's a positive. So if you can see it in that positive, and then for those of you who are thinking, but I already need this stuff, I can't imagine not eating, you know, my muffin in the day and my latte later. How am I going to live that way? That if you quit, it is only, please listen to this, it's only 3 weeks tops. And then your taste buds, like you mentioned earlier, start to reclimatize. You will start to enjoy our birthright, which is to enjoy real food like fruits and vegetables with the exquisite delight that we have. People who are cooks know this. It's delicious. Roasted Brussels sprouts, delicious. Like, you won't know that if you're eating cheesecake all the time, but it only takes 3 weeks to get back to that, as long as you don't slip into eating the sugar again. You can never compete with sugar because it's a drug. So there is a good news. There is a good ending to this story. It's actually an excellent ending. But even for the person who's going, I can't do this, you're right. You can't do it for 3 weeks, and then you can.
Thank you.
And also, if you can I just tell people about if they are inspired in any way to check out my website? Can I go ahead and do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have a book called Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. If you want to understand the science and the clinical about this, it's quite easy to read. And then I have my own podcast called Food Junkies Podcast, and a YouTube channel where I do a lot of talking and teaching about some of these concepts. So if you're interested to learn more about this stuff, there's lots of avenues to do so.
And I'll put it in the description as well, so people can easily find your book and your webpage and your services. You are such a wonderful light worker. Love it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.